In the dimly lit command bunker beneath the ruins of the last human city on the planet, the air was thick with tension as the leaders of the colony gathered around a table strewn with maps and data screens. The once bright hope of this world, now reduced to a flickering image of desperation. The human forces were broken, their fleet scattered and destroyed by the merciless alien invaders who had swept across the galaxy with unstoppable force. These invaders came from the void beyond the stars, their species vast and brutal, a single race consuming worlds one after another, and now they had come to Earth's last outpost with their massive armadas. The people who once thrived on this world were now left fighting for survival against impossible odds. The leader of the colony, Commander Kira, stood silently staring at the fading map on the screen. It showed their world slowly being encircled by the enemy fleet, every red dot a reminder of how quickly their end was approaching. Her fingers traced the outlines of the cities, still standing, but only just their defenses exhausted, their people worn thin from months of constant bombardment. There were no more ships to send, no more weapons left to fire. They had nothing more to give. The time for resistance was running out as quickly as their resources. Kira turned to the others gathered around the table, the commanders of various battalions, and the scientists who had worked tirelessly to keep the colony running despite the odds, and despite the destruction. They all knew what had to be done. They were not foolish. They understood the finality of the situation. They had given everything they could. Now they had one last card to play, a final desperate hope that might never reach anyone, that might never be answered. One of the engineers, Lieutenant Samuels, spoke, his voice strained but resolute. "We have the transmission array still up, just barely. If we send a distress signal to the farthest reaches of the galaxy, maybe someone will hear it. It's a long shot, but it's all we have left. We have to try. It's humanity's only chance." Kira nodded slowly, the weight of her decision pressing down on her shoulders. She knew the risk they were taking. There were countless unknowns out there in the dark abyss of space, countless worlds filled with beings who might not even care, or who might be just as hostile as the aliens bearing down on them. But she had seen the will to survive in her people, and in herself the fire that refused to be extinguished. She could not let them die without at least trying. She motioned to her communications officer, Sergeant Albright, who was already preparing the array. He met her gaze with a steady look in his eyes. Without a word, he turned to his station and began the process of activating the emergency transmission. The signal would be faint and scattered, but it was all they could afford. There was no time to wait for confirmation of its strength or its reach. All they could do was pray it would find someone, anyone who might answer. As Albright typed in the final coordinates for the message, Kira turned back to her team. She felt her heart pounding in her chest, her mind racing with the weight of the choice they were making. This could be the end, but it could also be their one chance to survive. The message she had chosen to send was simple, clear, and direct. "We've given everything. Now we ask for one thing. Help. Humanity calls for aid." She paused, and then added one final phrase to the message: "Humanity never gives up," she whispered to herself. But there was no time for doubt, no time for second thoughts. She had to believe in it. With a final press of a button, the message was sent out into the cold void of space, scattering into the stars beyond. There was no guarantee it would reach anyone, but they had done everything they could. Now all they could do was wait. The silence in the bunker was suffocating, the hum of the equipment, the only sound as the transmission sent out its final pulse. Into the void the waiting began. It stretched endlessly, as if time itself had slowed to a crawl. The alien fleet loomed overhead, like a dark shadow poised to crush the remnants of humanity. Beneath it, each minute that passed felt like an eternity. The survivors sat huddled around their stations, eyes glued to the screens, waiting for any sign that their message had reached its destination, hoping that someone anywhere out there might hear it. Kira paced the small command room, her boots clicking softly against the metal floor. Her mind raced through endless possibilities. The feeling of helplessness gnawed at her every step. What if the message never reached anyone? What if the galaxy had moved on from humanity? What if they were truly alone, stranded in this dark corner of space, to face their extinction in the face of an unstoppable enemy? The weight of the decision hung heavy around her neck, each thought more terrifying than the last, but there was nothing else to do but wait. She glanced at her crew. Samuels sat hunched over his console, his fingers hovering over the keyboard, as if willing some kind of miracle to happen. Albright stood beside him, watching the communications array flicker nervously, his eyes shifting back and forth between the empty blackness of the screen and the blinking lights that gave no indication of life. The others in the room were equally still, all of them waiting for something, anything that might bring them a shred of hope. The anticipation was unbearable. Minutes turned into hours, the sense of dread mounting with each passing second. The alien fleet grew closer, each fleet ship a looming symbol of humanity's dwindling chances. A few desperate souls might survive on the ground, if they were lucky, but it was becoming more and more evident that even that hope was fading as the countdown to their final assault began. The city would not hold much longer. Kira couldn't help but glance at the clock on the wall, the seconds ticking away one after another. The time was drawing near, and still nothing, not even a flicker of a response from the void above. Albright was the first to break the silence, his voice low but steady. "It's a long shot, Commander, but we're still getting the signal from the array. It's faint, but it's still there." A pulse in the silence. Kira's heart skipped a beat. She quickly crossed the room to his side. "What are you saying?" Albright repeated the words again, slower this time. "The signal is still live, Commander. It's reaching something out there, but it's not clear yet. There's no way to know if anyone is listening until we get something stronger, a response, or even an acknowledgement." The room was still as everyone processed the words. A faint signal. It was something more than they had expected after so many hours of uncertainty. But there was no time to get hopeful yet. They couldn't afford to let their guard down. The alien forces were moments away from launching their final assault, and they couldn't afford any distractions. Just as quickly as it had come, the brief flicker of hope could be snuffed out if they weren't careful. Kira exhaled deeply and gripped the back of the nearest chair. This was it. They had one shot at survival, one shot for humanity to rise from the ashes or be forgotten forever. She stared at the array, waiting for the signal to grow clearer or to die out altogether. The weight of the decision in her chest seemed almost unbearable. And then, in the midst of the silence, a new sound filled the room. It wasn't the usual hum of the equipment. It wasn't a glitch or static. It was a voice, soft but unmistakably human. Kira's breath caught in her throat as she turned to face Albright. "Is that it?" she asked, barely above a whisper. Albright's fingers flew over the controls, but his face paled as the voice continued its message, fragmented but unmistakably clear. "We heard you. Humanity is not alone." The voice crackled through the speakers, again distant and faint, but unmistakably human, the words hanging in the air like a fragile thread. "We heard you. Humanity is not alone." The room went deathly silent, the survivors frozen in place, as if they feared that even breathing too loudly would shatter this fragile moment. The voice echoed in Kira's mind over and over again. What did it mean? Who was speaking? And where were they? The words were like a distant beacon calling from somewhere far beyond the reaches of their galaxy. Kira's heart raced, her hands trembling slightly as she stepped closer to the communications console, her mind struggling to process the impossible. There was no way they could have known about the distress signal, no way they could have found them so quickly. The voice was too clear, too sure. It wasn't just some random anomaly or interference. It had to be real. Someone or something had heard their cry for help, and now it was responding. But who could it be? Samuels turned from his station, his voice shaky but full of urgency. "Commander, this is it. We're not alone, but we need more than just this message. We need coordinates, a location, something we can use to figure out who's out there, what they are, what they want." Albright frantically adjusted the controls, trying to get a better connection, but the signal remained faint, the words barely making it through the static. "Humanity is not alone." That's all they had so far, and it wasn't enough. They needed more. For what felt like an eternity, no one spoke, the room full of tension as the seconds stretched into what seemed like hours. Kira's mind was a storm of questions and doubts, but there was no time for hesitation, no time to second-guess. They had to act. They had to know if there was anyone else out there willing to stand with them, to fight alongside them, to save what was left of their world. Without a word, Kira gave a sharp nod to Albright, who immediately began rerouting the signal, trying to enhance its clarity, trying to reach something deeper within the communication system. But it was like trying to catch smoke with bare hands, the voice barely holding together. Before fading back into the static, the message was brief But powerful humanity stands together, the words cutting through the noise like a lifeline thrown out to a drowning ship. Samuel stood up abruptly, his face pale and wide-eyed. "Commander, we can do it. We can respond, we can reach them. But we need to boost the array's power just a little more, just enough to send something back. We can't afford to wait another second. If we lose this window, they'll never hear us again." Kira's gaze locked onto his. She didn't have to think twice. She knew what needed to be done. The risks didn't matter anymore. They couldn't afford to lose this chance, not now, not when they had a glimmer of hope. She turned to Albright, who was already moving to reroute the power through the backup systems, pushing everything to the limit. The hum of the machines grew louder as the energy surged through the communications array, the pulse of hope growing stronger with each passing second. But it was still faint, still fragile. They needed a clearer response if they had any chance of turning this around. Albright wiped his brow, his fingers moving faster than Kira had ever seen him work, his voice sharp as he spoke. "We're ready, Commander, but we have to send everything we've got. There's no going back. Once we do this," Kira nodded sharply, her mind made up. The time for hesitation was over. With one final press of a button, she sent their response into the stars. Humanity stands united, and they waited, not knowing whether the message would reach its intended recipient, or if they would simply fade into nothingness like so many others before them. For what felt like an eternity, the room was still, the hum of the machines now louder than ever as they waited to see if their message would return to them, or if it would be swallowed up by the void and disappear like so many others before it. Kira stood at the front of the room, her eyes locked on the flickering screen before her, watching as the last remnants of their message spread out into the stars. She could feel her heart racing, the uncertainty clawing at her chest. But there was no turning back now. They had sent everything they had, and now they had to hope that someone out there would hear it and answer. The seconds ticked by, dragging on in painful slowness, as Albright continued to monitor the transmission, his hands trembling as he watched the feedback on his console. The room was thick with anticipation. Samuels paced back and forth, his footsteps echoing off the metal floors, and Kira couldn't help but notice how every member of the team seemed to hold their breath, waiting for a sign, anything that would tell them that their effort hadn't been in vain. But nothing came. The silence stretched, and Kira began to wonder if they had made a mistake, if they had pushed the array too hard, and now they would be left with nothing. Just as the thought crossed her mind, a strange noise filled the room, a low rumbling sound that seemed to vibrate through the walls like a pulse coming from deep within the earth. The equipment hummed louder than before, and Albright's eyes widened as he looked up at Kira. "Commander, the signal, it's coming back stronger than before." Kira's pulse quickened. He moved to his side, quickly, her breath catching in her throat. "Is it them?" Albright glanced at the screen as the noise grew louder, the voice. "It's not clear yet, but it's definitely a response." Kira felt a spark of hope flicker within her. Could it be? Could someone actually be responding? Then the voice came again. It was faint at first, just a whisper through the static, but unmistakably human. Kira held her breath as the words came through. "We are coming. Humanity is not alone." The words sent a shiver down her spine, a spark of warmth in the cold void of space, as the realization hit them all at once. Someone had heard them, someone had answered. Kira couldn't believe it, her mind spinning as she looked at her team. This wasn't just a random signal or some distant anomaly. Someone out there was coming for them. They had responded with urgency. There was no mistaking it. The voice was full of determination and strength. It was the kind of message that no one would send unless they were prepared to act. Samuels leaned forward, eyes wide with disbelief. "Do you think they're really coming here?" Kira didn't answer at first. She couldn't put her thoughts into words. Instead, she just nodded slowly. There was no time for doubt. Now they had to believe, they had to trust that this was their moment. This was the chance they had been waiting for. She turned to Albright. "What do we do now?" He looked up from his console, his face pale but resolute. "We send another message, Commander. We tell them we're ready, we're holding on. And we need them now more than ever." Kira didn't hesitate this time. She had no doubt in her mind. She walked to the console, and without looking back she sent their reply into the stars. Humanity stands ready. And now they would wait again, hoping that this time they would hear the answer they had been praying for. The room was thick with anticipation as the seconds bled into minutes. Kira stood still, watching the screens, waiting for a sign. The hum of the equipment was louder now, as if the machines themselves had caught the same sense of urgency that gripped everyone in the room. The air felt charged with something unknown, like the calm before a storm. They had sent their reply, they had made their stand, and now they had to wait to see if the message would be enough to draw their mysterious saviors closer. Would they come to their aid, or would it all be in vain? Kira glanced around at the faces of her team. Samuels stood by the map, his eyes locked on the screen as if waiting for the world to change before him. Albright was glued to his console, his fingers hovering over the controls, ready to act at a moment's notice, his face pale from exhaustion, but his expression sharp with determination. The tension was palpable in the room. Each of them held their breath silently, willing the unknown force to hear them, to answer their call. Then suddenly a flicker of light appeared on the screen, the faintest trace of something coming through the static. Albright's hands moved faster than Kira had ever seen him work. He adjusted the array, his eyes darting back and forth as the transmission began to stabilize. "We are coming," the voice crackled again, this time clearer, more defined. "Humanity will be saved." Kira's heart skipped a beat. She could feel the weight of the words settle into her chest, as if a long-forgotten hope had just been reignited in that single moment. They were not alone, they were not abandoned. The room erupted in a mixture of disbelief and relief. Samuels let out a breath. He hadn't realized he was holding Albright, stood frozen, eyes wide, as the voice continued to filter through the static. "We are humanity's legacy." The words echoed in Kira's mind with a strange resonance. They were not just any force out there. They were something more. They were a force born from humanity's very survival, something that had been watching over them, waiting for the moment to strike back at the oppressors. Kira's thoughts raced, her heart pounding in her chest. The questions flooded in. What did they mean by humanity's legacy? Who were they? How had they found them? But there was no time for answers now, only action. She turned to her team. "It's them, they're coming," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Samuels nodded, his face set in a grim determination. "They can't get here fast enough," he muttered, and Kira knew he was right. The alien fleet was still there, looming overhead. Their final assault could begin at any moment. They had no time to waste. Albright's fingers danced over the console. He was already working on relaying their position, enhancing the signal to give their mysterious allies everything they needed to find them. The transmission was still coming through clear, but not perfectly, and time was running out. Every moment counted as the alien forces prepared to strike. They wouldn't have much longer to wait before the final battle began. Kira felt a rush of adrenaline flood through her. She had no idea who these new allies were or what their intentions might be, but they had offered a glimmer of hope in a world drowning in despair. And that was enough for now. They had one shot at survival, one chance to fight back before the aliens wiped them out entirely. She turned to her team again. The moment was coming. It was time to prepare for whatever was to come next. Whatever this mysterious force had in store for them, they would be ready. Humanity would not go down without a fight. "We fight for our future," Kira thought to herself. And with that she gave the command to prepare for the battle ahead. The tension in the command bunker was unbearable, the air thick with anticipation. As the survivors prepared for what could be their final stand, the alien fleet was still circling above their planet, the dark ships hovering like vultures waiting to descend and finish what they had started. There was no turning back now. They had done everything they could to survive. And now all they could do was wait for the strange force that had promised to save them to arrive, and hope that they would be able to hold out long enough to survive the coming assault. Kira stood at the front of the room, her eyes fixed on the screens, her hands gripping the edge of the table, as she watched the massive fleet above their planets slowly begin to move, their weapons charging, ready to unleash hell on what remained of humanity. Beneath the surface, she could feel the fear and uncertainty growing like a storm in her chest. But there was no time for fear, no time for doubt. She had led her people this far, and she would lead them into whatever came next, no matter what. Albright and Samuels worked quickly at their consoles, their fingers flying over the controls as they tried to fine-tune the signal their mysterious allies had sent them. They had promised they were coming, but there was no guarantee they would make it in time, no guarantee that they could save them from the destruction that was about to rain down on the planet. Suddenly, the room was filled with a soft hum as the communication array flickered to life again. Albright's voice rang out with a sense of urgency. "Commander, it's them, they're coming." The signal is stronger than ever before. Kira's heart skipped a beat as she turned toward him. "What do you mean, the fleet?" she asked, her voice tight with anticipation. Albright turned to her, his face pale, but his eyes wide with shock. "They've arrived, Commander, they're here." A series of strange symbols appeared on the screen. They weren't like anything Kira had ever seen before. They seemed to pulse with an energy all their own, as if they were alive, but there was no mistaking the meaning behind them. The fleet of mysterious human ships was closing in, their massive forms now visible on the edge of the atmosphere, their glowing hulls casting a strange light against the darkness of space. Kira's breath caught in her throat as she watched the ships draw closer. They were unlike anything she had ever seen. They were massive but sleek, with designs that seemed to flow and change with the very fabric of space itself. They shimmered like living beings, their surfaces glowing with an eerie energy that made the air in the room feel electric and alive. The alien fleet above their planet seemed to hesitate for a moment, a flicker of confusion passing through their ranks before they rallied and began to charge at the incoming ships. But it was too late. The human ships fired first, a blast of energy so powerful that it tore through the alien fleet with terrifying precision. The shockwaves of the attack rippled out across the planet, and the skies lit up with the brilliant light of battle. Kira's eyes widened as she watched the destruction unfold on the screens. The alien ships were falling one by one, their massive forms crumbling under the force of the human attack. The survivors in the bunker held their breath, watching as the battle raged above them. It was like watching the impossible unfold before their eyes. Humanity was fighting back and winning. The tide of the battle was turning, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, there was hope in the air. The invaders were being driven back, their fleet scattered in the wake of the unexpected human assault. Kira could hardly believe what she was seeing. Humanity was not just surviving, they were taking the fight to the aliens, and they were winning. But the battle wasn't over yet. The alien forces still had their weapons ready. They were not easily defeated, and Kira knew that this fight was far from won. But with the arrival of these new allies, she could feel something shift, something deep within her. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about reclaiming their future. Humanity wasn't just fighting to stay alive anymore. They were fighting to take back their world. The battle raged above the planet as the skies burned with the energy of war. Kira stood frozen in the command bunker, eyes glued to the screens as the massive alien ships crumbled under the might of the human fleet. But even as the enemy fell, their remaining forces were relentless. They had not yet given up, and Kira knew the fight was far from over. The arrival of these mysterious allies had turned the tide, but the war was still ongoing, and humanity would need to give everything they had if they wanted to survive. Albright and Samuels worked furiously at their stations, rerouting energy to the remaining defenses, strengthening the shields and weapons as much as they could. But the alien fleet was regrouping. They were forming new strategies. They were adapting quickly. They weren't going to be beaten so easily. The humans would need to hold their ground, and Kira could feel the pressure of it all weighing down on her shoulders. Her people were depending on her to guide them through this final battle. One of the screens flickered, and a new image appeared, a close-up of the alien flagship towering above the battlefield, its monstrous form surrounded by the wreckage of its fleet. The ship was still firing back at the human forces, its weapons powerful and unrelenting. It was a symbol of their enemies' determination to wipe humanity from the galaxy once and for all. Kira's eyes narrowed as she studied the ship. If they were going to win this, they needed to take down that flagship, and fast. Commander, Kira, Samuels called out, his voice tense. "We've detected a weakness in their flagship's shield system. It's been fluctuating ever since the battle began. If we can get a shot through at just the right moment, we might be able to take it down. It's risky, but it's our best shot." Kira turned to him, her gaze sharp and determined. "Do it," she ordered. "Don't hesitate. This is our chance." Albright didn't need any more prompting. His hands moved like lightning as he worked to coordinate the attack with the rest of the fleet. The hum of the communications array filled the room as the ships began to align their weapons, targeting the alien flagship. Kira's heart pounded in her chest as she watched everything unfold. They had no time to waste. Every second counted, and if they missed this shot, if they failed, they might not get another chance. On the screens, the human ships moved into position, their weapons glowing bright. As they locked on to the weak point in the flagship's shields, the alien ship was still firing back, but its movements were becoming more erratic. Its defenses were starting to fail, and that was all the opening the humans needed. Kira held her breath as the countdown began. 3, 2, 1. Now the command rang out, and a pulse of energy shot from the human ships, a brilliant beam of light cutting through the darkness of space and striking the flagship with pinpoint precision. The explosion was deafening, the shockwave carrying through the alien ship and shattering its shield. The massive vessel rocked as if it had been hit by a sledgehammer, and then it began to crumble, its core igniting in a brilliant flash of light. Kira's breath caught in her throat as the flagship began to break apart. The alien forces panicked as their leader's ship fell into ruin. They had no command, no direction left. And it was then that the full weight of the human counterattack came crashing down. The remaining alien ships faltered and then fell one by one as the human fleet moved in with relentless precision. It was happening. They were winning. The tide of the battle had turned completely, and now the aliens were in retreat. Kira felt a wave of relief flood through her, but she didn't dare let herself relax. Not yet. The final remnants of the enemy fleet were still out there, and they had to make sure the battle was truly over. She turned to Samuels. "Keep pushing. We finish this now. We don't give them a chance to regroup." The fight wasn't over, but for the first time in what felt like forever, Kira felt a spark of hope, something real, something powerful. She knew they could do it. Humanity had come together and shown the galaxy that they would never back down. No matter the odds, no matter the cost, they would fight for their future. The retreat of the alien fleet was not a complete victory, not yet, but the shift in momentum was undeniable. The once overbearing presence of the invaders had faltered, and now it was humanity's turn to press the advantage. The human ships continued their relentless assault, with the flagship destroyed and the remaining forces in disarray. The alien ships were falling apart, their communications scrambling as they struggled to reorganize, but their efforts were futile. The human fleet had them on the run, and every ship in their ranks was closing in for the kill. Kira watched the battle unfold on the screens, her heart pounding, but there was no room for celebration. Not yet. The alien forces were retreating, but they were far from broken. They were still powerful and desperate to maintain their grip on the planet. She knew that their leaders would not surrender so easily. This was not over until they had wiped out every last trace of the alien invaders. Albright was already coordinating the final phases of the assault, his voice steady as he relayed commands to the fleet. "We need to disable their remaining ships. Don't let them regroup." Kira nodded her approval, knowing that now was the time to finish what they had started. No hesitation, no mercy. The invaders had shown none to humanity, and they would show none in return. Samuels was tracking the alien movements, his eyes glued to the tactical map. "We have one more large ship on the far side of the atmosphere. Its shields are still active, but its weapons are offline. It's trying to retreat into deep space, but we can intercept it now if we act fast," he said. Kira turned to him, her decision already made. "Do it. Take it out now. Don't let it escape this time." They would make sure the alien forces would never return. The fleet moved swiftly as the human ships adjusted their positions, aligning to cut off the last of the invaders. The remaining alien ship was desperately trying to move away from the battlefield, its engines flaring as it attempted to escape into the vastness of space. But the humans were faster. They had learned from their earlier missteps, and now they moved with deadly precision. The beam cannons charged once again, and as the last alien ship attempted to flee, a single pulse of energy blasted through the darkness, cutting through its remaining shields and striking its core with unrelenting force. The explosion was immense, tearing the alien vessel apart in an instant, the shockwave rippling outward as the ship disintegrated into nothingness, a final symbol of humanity's defiance, a victory that was hard-earned and paid for in sweat, blood, and tears. For a long moment, the battlefield was silent. The dark void of space seemed almost peaceful after the chaos that had just unfolded. Kira exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding as she surveyed the destruction of the alien fleet. The skies were clear now. The threat had been neutralized, but there was no time for celebration, no time to rest yet. They had won, but the price had been high, and they still had to pick up the pieces. Kira turned back to the team, her voice steady as she spoke. "We did it, we've won. But there's still much to do. The work's not finished. Yet we rebuild, we stand strong. And we make sure this never happens again." Samuels nodded, already moving to relay the new orders. Albright was monitoring the remaining communications and scanning the area for any remaining threats. But even as Kira issued orders and watched the recovery efforts begin, something deep inside her had shifted. The weight of the battle still pressed on her shoulders, but there was a new feeling there too, something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope for the future. Humanity had just taken its first step back into the stars. It was a victory not just for survival, but for a future that they would fight to protect no matter the cost. The silence that followed the destruction of the last alien ship was almost deafening. A strange stillness settling over the command bunker as everyone took in the magnitude of what they had just accomplished. Kira stood at the front of the room, her eyes scanning the quiet faces of her team. The adrenaline that had carried them through the battle was slowly fading, and the exhaustion of the fight was beginning to settle in. But even in the weariness, she could see the spark of something new in their eyes, a glimmer of hope. They had won this battle, but the war for humanity's future was only just beginning. Kira turned her gaze back to the screens. The skies were clear now, the last of the invaders gone. But she knew that this moment of peace was fleeting. There would be no time to rest, no time to savor the victory, not when there was so much left to rebuild, so much still at risk. Humanity had proven itself capable of standing against the most formidable of enemies, but the cost had been great, and the scars of the war would linger for years to come. Albright spoke first, his voice tired, but full of quiet resolve. "Commander, the enemy is gone for now, but the communication network is still active. We've detected faint signals coming from their ship's data that wasn't completely wiped out. If we can access it, we might learn more about their true intentions, where they came from, what they wanted, and whether there are others out there." Kira nodded thoughtfully. The mystery was far from over. Their enemies might be defeated, but the knowledge they had left behind could offer crucial insights into what humanity was really up against. "We need to know everything," she replied firmly. "I want all data gathered and analyzed immediately, and I want every resource focused on understanding who they were and how they were able to find us. We're not just surviving anymore, we're building for the future of humanity." Samuels nodded and moved to the tactical map, adjusting the coordinates for a deeper scan of the wreckage their enemies had left behind. His fingers dancing over the screen as he worked to pull in as much information as possible, while Albright turned back to his station, his fingers flying over the keyboards as he began to sift through the remaining communications and data packets that had survived the battle. Kira felt the weight of the moment pressing in on her shoulders, but she refused to let it break her. Now they had won against impossible odds. They had proven that humanity could fight back, even in the face of overwhelming destruction, but they couldn't afford to rest on their laurels. Now it was time to rebuild, time to prepare for whatever came next. "We can't afford to wait," she thought. "We have to be ready for whatever challenges await us out there." And for the first time in what felt like forever, Kira allowed herself a small moment of hope, not for the past, not for what had been lost, but for the future. Humanity had fought for its survival, and now it was time to fight for something more. As she watched the team continue to work tirelessly, preparing the data and fortifying their position, Kira felt a sense of quiet pride settle within her. They had done the impossible, and though the road ahead would not be easy, they had proven that humanity was capable of standing together against any enemy and rising from the ashes to create something new and stronger than before. "We have a future," Kira thought, "and it's ours to shape." Humanity had survived the darkest days, and now they would build a new world, a world where they would never again be the hunted, but the hunters, a world where they would stand tall among the stars and defend what was theirs against any threat that dared to challenge them. Humanity had answered the call. And they would never stop answering as long as there was breath in their lungs and hope in their hearts. They would fight for the future they had earned.